Thanks, Vince. Good morning. So I have the dubious job of waking you all up this morning, and I hope to do as good of a job as possible here and tell you some of the interesting consequences and the interesting things that went on with having the vote on Pluto. I happen to be one of the people that was in the room voting at that time. You can throw things at me if you want, but I will immediately puncture that bubble and tell you that I was one of the people voting against the new definition. So hopefully that's worth something in this crowd. I can tell this is going to be an easy crowd, so this is great. It's really a tall tale, and I'm trying to tell a story here and try to relate some of the, give you some of the flavor of what it's like to have a life in astronomy. And so one of the things I do want to warn you about, though, is that this is my own personal story. I'm here as one of the people who happen to have been there, but I'm not expressing an official position of Lowell Observatory. I always have to put in that lawyer speak there, though please do remember us in your estate plans and annual giving. I will also point out that I am an astronomer. I am not a planetary scientist. So actually, I should not be here talking about the Pluto vote. This is one of the points I'll come back to. And then the other thing I'll point out is that astronomers frequently use a lot of assumptions and a lot of things that we skirt past, and you're welcome to poke at that. So for example, as somebody who does stellar modeling and stellar measuring, we always talk about the spherical cow, and so this is the sort of assumptions that go into this kind of work. So I will also point out that when caught out on some of these things, I do actually admit error. So this is actually me at my first astronomy meeting abroad in 1998, some years ago. And the wonderful Michael Feast from the South African Astronomical Observatory was pointing out this new dissertation work from this Dr. Van Belle. But there was this error in the one measurement we think we found. And so I actually got up in front of the crowd and admitted to the fact that we had actually caught that after publication. So this, of course, was very exciting for many people. So thankfully, that kind of thing went over well. Actually, my Australian colleague came up to me afterwards and said, wow, that took some balls, Gerard. So I felt very good about that. So anyway, we're going to have our story happening primarily in the year 2006. So I want to paint a backdrop of what was happening for me personally, and maybe in general things that you remember from 10 years ago, basically. And this is what we saw 10 years ago, or what we thought we knew of Pluto. And so this is the state of affairs 10 years ago. Now, where do we start this story? Well, I always like to start the story, in fact, all the way back to the air races. So a group of us, every year from JPL, where I was at the time, we had a flying club. We would get together and go to the Reno air races. And this is, of course, a group of very serious astronomers. And we're, befitting our profession. And so we go to this meeting, and we have this group that goes there. In fact, one of our group was a retired police officer, a fellow named Mike. And he always wore his beloved jacket. He loved his jacket very much. And he left early that year and forgot his jacket. And so he calls us up, and he's like, have you guys seen my jacket? And we're like holding it right in front of us. And we're like, jacket? We don't see any jacket. We immediately decided to take the jacket on travel the next year. So for the entire year, we set up a web page, and you could check the jacket out. There was its own calendar. And this jacket was traveling the world with us, and we did a pretty good job of taking it places across the world. And so this is one of the things for me that was happening in 2006. This is a very important thing, of course. The other thing that happened was I'm a big football fan from Seattle. This was the first year that the Seattle Seahawks went to the Super Bowl. For those of you that follow that kind of thing, you may remember that it didn't turn out so well for the Seahawks that year. One of my closest friends and colleague at Caltech at the time, Dr. David Ciardi, big Steelers fan, happened to be the opponent that year. So that did not turn out well in a particularly bad way because he was able to tease me about that for the rest of the year. This was a thorn in my side that year. So at this point, you're probably sitting in the crowd going, wait, 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 weren't we supposed to be talking about Pluto? What is all this about airplanes and football and this kind of thing? So trust me, we'll come back to this. The other thing that was happening in 2006 of particular importance for Pluto was, of course, New Horizons. So we had a launch of the New Horizons spacecraft, January 19, 2006. And this grand piano-sized spacecraft was hurled into space at a very, very fast rate. I always like to point out the Apollo missions went to the moon in 3 days, and New Horizons crossed the orbit of the moon in 9 hours. It was really, came off the pad like it was unglued. So in fact, I'll even call attention to the fact that there were motivations to try and get there as fast as possible. I had an interesting conversation with the director of JPL at one point prior to the launch of New Horizons, Ed Stone, who had been the Voyager mission scientist, still is in fact. And one of the things I'd asked him was, well, Voyager 2 had done all these flybys, and maybe you could have just, instead of directing it the way it went, maybe you could have directed it towards Pluto. And his answer was very descriptive to me of how some of this thinking goes on inside the hallways of NASA bureaucracy, which was, well, when we got to Neptune, we could go either past Triton or we could angle it so we went towards Pluto. And Triton was 3 hours away, and Pluto was 3 years away, and I had to make payroll. So there you have it. So anyway, that's what led to New Horizons. Maybe that's not true, actually, but it was actually a good quote from him. The launch is a wondrous thing to see. They took a small spacecraft and put it on the very biggest rocket you could buy at the time. And it always gives me chills to watch this because this thing really does come off the pad like it's unglued. If you think of the stately Saturn launches to the moon and think of how quickly this thing is going up, it just really is incredible to see, especially this shot here. You can just basically see it going. It was on its merry way. So then we had lots of time to wait for Pluto. So in the meantime, other things were happening. There was things starting to shift with regards to our view of the solar system. There was the discovery of bodies in the outer solar system that were being pushed along largely by this gentleman, Mike Brown, a very smart fellow at Caltech who's really revolutionized the exploration of the outer solar system. And at that time, he was actually just wrestling with the discovery of a new body that, as they gathered data, they weren't sure if it was going to be bigger than Pluto or not. And that actually promoted a lot of navel gazing in the astronomical community to start thinking about what it meant to be a planet. What are we doing when we call things planets? He rather glibly and cheekily, for at least the time being, called this object called Xena. And in fact, he even found a little companion to this that they went ahead then called Gabrielle. And so that means, of course, that we have this possibly being a planet. So more food for thought for the astronomical community. Meanwhile, as all this is going on at Caltech, Mike Brown is at Caltech too, by the way, I, of course, engaging in very serious work at Caltech. My collaborator, Dr. Ciardi, who had been proceeding to tease me about the Seahawks losing the Super Bowl, he had on his car a license plate holder, which I upgraded for him. And he, in fact, did not notice this for many, many months, which was very delightful. So this then brings us many, many months forward to August of 2006. And here's where things start to take an interesting tumble and turn of affairs. I had some travel in 2006. I had quite a bit of travel in 2006. I had a quick trip from the LA area up to San Jose to go to NASA Ames. I was sitting on a review panel for a spacecraft that was going to fly. And I also then, the day after I was to get back from Burbank, get back flying through Burbank, I was then going to go on to go with my wife and young new son and go on to Europe and ultimately end up at this meeting called the International Astronomical Union General Assembly. The IAU meets every few years, and this meeting was going to be one that I was going to go to. And there was already at that point starting to be some rumors of some kind of vote going on at this meeting. I actually had no involvement and no interest in any planet vote at the time. I was going to the IAU because of other organizational things in the astronomical community that I was involved in. But this was starting to kind of bubble up, and people were talking about this, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So first of all, though, I had my trip up to Ames, interesting trip in and of itself, with having to deal with the Kepler mission. So Kepler, as we know now, has flown. At that time, it had not yet flown, and its mission at that time was to stare at a whole bunch of stars and potentially see a dip in brightness associated with a planet going around its host star. In retrospect, we all know that Kepler was wildly successful, but at that point in time, there was still a lot of hand-wringing over, how's it going to work, what's going to happen with the data, particularly this review board that I sat on at the time, which is, how are we going to deal with this torrent of data that's going to be coming off the spacecraft? And so there were a lot of reviews and a lot of examinations of how the software pipeline was going to work, and that's what I was doing for a day up at Ames, and then I was going to merrily fly back down to Burbank Airport from San Jose. That was harder than it looked, because that was the very same day of the liquid bomber plot, where there was this idea that all these planes coming from London to the US would have these people on board with these nasty desires and intents, which fortunately got caught. But it made travel that day rather interesting. Travel was a bit hectic. In fact, the crazy part was I actually ducked out of the review up at Ames a little early because I tried to beat all the rush. And it actually wasn't that bad. The travel was okay that day. But there was still kind of this, mutual bonding of hardship among passengers. And I happened to meet a very interesting person on the flight. And she was very interested in the discussions I was having with her about Xena. Here she is with me at baggage claim. And she actually was very good-natured. She even had a picture with me with my friend Mike's jacket, which we were at this point taking all over the world. And so this was a great addition to the story of Mike's jacket. So she had a very keen interest in the outcome of the vote that was going to come up. And so I actually was corresponding with her throughout the trip I took to Europe. Now, going to Europe, our first stop was in Amsterdam. Here's my lovely wife and our son right here at the time. And it was an interesting trip, though, because that day was actually the day that all hell broke loose at the airport. So we're on our way to the airport, and the first thing I notice is that I'm missing my wallet. I forgot to bring my wallet. Fortunately, she had hers, and I had my passport still, so we were at that point, we're just like, stay on target, get to the back end. And so I left my wallet at home. And the other thing is, there was these long lines, and we had all these check-in problems, and a problem with getting an infant on board an international flight, and we literally had to sprint through security, and we got on the plane, I'm putting my stuff in the baggage claim, or in the overhead bin, and the first thing I notice is the scientific poster that I'm going to present at the meeting in Prague is, of course, missing. And so we're like, oh, where is it? Where did it go? And I was like, oh, crap, it's still in security. So it's gone. So there's nothing to do with that. So I figured, okay, fine. We have a layover in Dulles, and I will email my friend, David Ciardi, and have him just print me a new copy of the poster and send it. So we get to Dulles, we sit down in the lounge there, and I attempt to email my friend, David Ciardi, and I think about that, and I'm like, where's my laptop? Where's my laptop? Next to the poster. The laptop was still back at LAX security as well. So this was rapidly going downhill. Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, actually, we were supposed to catch up with my colleague, Theo ten Brummelaar, and we were going to have a rental place for a few days before we continued on to the meeting in Prague. And he was going through Heathrow. He actually didn't have a flight out of the US direct to Amsterdam. And Heathrow, being the epicenter of all this, was a disaster. And so we show up in Amsterdam, and he's just missing. There's no telling where he's at. And so ultimately, we finally connect with him. He and his wife, a few days late, finally get to Amsterdam. No clothes, nothing. It's all their bags have been confiscated at Heathrow, and so they don't have anything. After a few days in Amsterdam, we were going to then go on to Prague. They still don't have any clothes. Their clothes never showed up. And we decided, okay, fine, let's take the ones you have, wash them, and we'll dry them off. The dryer breaks. Theo has the bright idea of, hey, let's put the clothes in the stove and warm them off. This doesn't work very well. In fact, he set his clothes on fire. And so it's always a bright idea to then try to board a plane after a major security incident with clothes that are clearly singed. But we managed to get to Prague, ultimately. Oh yeah, and of course, in Amsterdam, more opportunities to take pictures of Mike's jacket as it travels the world. But we do finally get to Prague, and Prague is just gorgeous. Prague is a lovely city, a lot of astronomical things. In fact, there's the lovely clock tower here that you can see. Again, good place for a picture with Mike's jacket. And we proceed to settle in for the meeting. And you know, this is one of the perks of being an astronomer, is you do get to go to meetings occasionally in interesting places. The IAU meeting, one of the first things that comes to mind, particularly maybe for this crowd, is, well, what is the IAU? What the heck is this group? And what the IAU is it's a body that is concerned about standards and organization. So it wants to make sure that when, say, I'm talking to an astronomer in Tokyo and I say, oh, well, this star is third magnitude, we have an agreement, a standardized set of measures that basically relate the fact that when I say a magnitude, he thinks one thing, I think one thing, and it's the same thing. That's very important in science, is to have standards and organization like that. Lots of actually fairly boring stuff. And absolutely essential stuff, because without that kind of agreement and standardization in units and how things are going, then there's going to be chaos, cats and dogs living together. But yeah, so there's very useful things that they do. Also at these meetings, since they're bringing all the scientists together to talk about organizing things, we also do exchange science results. So one of the things that I had was a science poster that I was bringing. I had some results from the Spitzer Space Telescope, looking at how a couple of stars eclipse each other. And this was actually the science was somewhat ancillary. It was actually a technical demonstration of how precise the data could be coming off of Spitzer. And you could then turn around and instead of looking at a transiting set of stars, you would actually look at a planet that was transiting around its host star and try and measure that dip in brightness. And so how good could you get, how small of a planet could you see and still have a dip in brightness that you could detect? This was the missing poster. This is the poster that was sitting at LAX security. My friend David Ciardi was very kind. He printed a new version of the poster, sent it to Prague, and he did take the opportunity to upgrade the poster. So in the corner here, you always have a little thing showing, you know, if you want to come talk to me, here's what I look like. And so he took some liberties with that. And this is what the poster actually looked like. So once again, a thorn in my side. So these kind of things, I mean, astronomers are very serious fellows, let me tell you. And you know, the guys and gals that work at Caltech, we had a very good time working on these things. So we show up in Prague, and the buzz about the planet vote is in full swing. And in fact, it's such a big meeting, they actually print a newspaper. And the daily newspaper early on in the meeting was showing the draft version of this resolution where the IU had decided to take upon itself the notion that they will define what a planet is. And this is the language that was in the original one. It's a lot of words. I'll boil it down for you, which is basically, is it big enough to be a ball? If you take a body in outer space and you lump stuff onto it, does it become spherical? And at that point, you have a planet. Now, this is interesting because this is a very inclusionary definition. This means that at that point in time, there were 11 planets. There was the 9 we all accepted and knew about. Ceres comes back into the fold after having been evicted some 150, 200 years ago. Pluto and Charon become planets. And this new thing out here, one of these distant Kuiper Belt objects that had been discovered, also comes into the fold. So that is where things were for the most of the meeting, in fact. But you know, interesting things were afoot. So first thing I'm going to point out as a little aside here is, well, Pluto and Charon, both planets, what's up with that? Well, as we had highlighted during the New Horizons mission this last summer, Pluto and Charon are of sufficient relative mass that they orbit a common center of mass, this so-called barycenter right here. The barycenter is, in fact, external to Pluto. Pluto's actually lobbling around that, just like Charon, at a much greater distances going around that. And so, in fact, what's this idea then you could have a binary planet? Well, elsewhere in astronomy, we've got lots of binary stuff. We're pretty comfortable with that. We have binary stars, we have binary asteroids, all kinds of binary stuff. So maybe it's not such a reach to think of binary planets. The Earth and the Moon, you could even think about that. There you tamp down on that notion a bit, because the barycenter is actually not external to the Earth. But again, that's getting kind of lawyerly. Though I will point out that the barycenter of the Earth-Moon system is closer to the surface of the Earth than it is to the center of the Earth. So the Earth is kind of wobbling around too because of its partner. So anyway, with all those sorts of discussions being bandied about and being pondered about over beers late at night in Prague, we proceed to the vote on the last day. And we pretty much get sprung on us a new definition. And this is the definition which you can see up here has a great deal of merit because it has a lot more words. This is important. You know, you always want a lot of words when you're trying to pretend to be a lawyer. So again, I will try to boil this down for you. These are the words, but if you actually zero in on them, you have these ideas once again of, is it big enough to be a ball? But then this new thing, is it big enough to be a bully? Does it push things around? Does it clear out its orbital zone? And in fact, not only is it clearing its orbital zone, has it cleared, past tense, its orbital zone? And if it has not done that, it only is this dwarf planet thing. So it's big enough to be a ball, but not big enough to be a bully. And then they went on to say everything else is the small solar system bodies. Maybe I can distill it down even further, which is clearly what was afoot there, which is to take this idea of the dwarf planet and identify it as something that is not a planet. Even though the word planet is in the phrase dwarf planet, there's like one of those Microsoft Word unbreakable spaces between dwarf and planet. It's its own thing. So yeah, so this was jumped on us, and that's what we had to discuss and to vote on. And it was very interesting. We're sitting there, we're taking selfies of ourselves before selfie was even a word, you know. And you know, we knew that we were going to be making history of sorts. Here's my colleague Brian Mason of the US Naval Observatory in DC. And yeah, we were issued these very, very lovely vote cards. I have this framed, actually. It's sitting on the wall over in Lowell Observatory. Come visit us. We have a great public program. And there was checking of, you know, if you were on the membership rolls when you came in, and you know, all these sorts of things that would happen. And so the vote happened, and now we have to live with the result. And we can go into detail about that vote. So let's think about that. But I'm going to first point out, again, the IAU does very valuable things. You know, these standards are important to establish. In fact, here are some of the votes that actually happened that same day, talking about how systems of frames of reference describe our solar system in relation to the, you know, in relation to how the Earth moves inside of it. And, you know, especially time is a big deal, where we establish standards for time and how do you measure amounts of time that have elapsed, and in particular, how do you establish 0 points in time. So lots of that kind of thing. In fact, this is one of the things that frustrates me the most about this whole affair, which is the IAU does serious important business, and to engage in actually downright silliness about definitions of planet really kind of frustrate, because it's just a bad idea. The other thing I'll point out before we get to poking at this definition, the process, and the result, is that there has been a history in astronomy of planets coming and planets going. And so if you look at old textbooks, including, say, this one from 1826 that we have in our archives at Lowell, there in fact was a period of time where the 4 big asteroids were the only known asteroids, and in fact were considered planets. They were objects in the sky that moved around. So Ceres, Pallas, Vesta, Juno, these 4 things, they, between, I believe it was 1807 and 1845, they were the only asteroids known. So I was figured, well, they got to be planets. In 1845, with new techniques and motivated astronomers, we started to actually discover scads now of asteroids. We're up to hundreds of thousands of asteroids known now. And the names have changed too. So let's look in this book and see what we see. Yeah, so 1826 is where we're at. If you look at some of the pages here, you'll see some interesting things. Like at the bottom of this page, we can see our known interesting planets, including this guy here, Herschel, planet Herschel. Actually, not planet Herschel. That's what we now know as Uranus. But at that time, at least some textbooks referred to it as Herschel. And if we zoom into the inner part of the solar system, actually, so this is still the outer. We have our big bodies here, Uranus, Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn. We zoom into the center, we can see our familiar friends, but there's also these other guys here. See this and here. So who are they? And these are our friends, Juno, Pallas, Ceres, and Vesta. You can actually identify that by, if you look at the orbits, they have the symbols attached there. Up until asteroid 37, I think it was, every one of these new bodies was getting its own little funky symbol that they use for astrology. So great paper recently on extrasolar planet astrology just came out too, by the way. You should read that. So anyway, we can now, at this point, use this precipice we are standing on and dip into metaphysics. So when I was an undergrad student, I worked with a professor, Craig Gunsel, at my undergraduate, Whitman College. And if we ever got to that regime of, talking about, well, how does human consciousness work, or these kind of things that, you do when you're 18 years old and undergrad and not really knowing any better. And he would always say, wrong building, philosophy is across Ankeny Field on the other side of the campus. So, the problem is, though, you carry this with you for the rest of your life, having the benefits of a classical education. A great line from my favorite Christmas film of all time. And so I will warn people, I do have a liberal arts degree, and we do talk about such things. So a good question here from that perspective is, what are we doing when we are basically engaging in scientific etymology, in the process of naming things and categorizing things? What's the whole point of having a label, like the word planet? And so the idea is taxonomy. We want to put things into boxes. And this is actually an endeavor in science that's fraught with peril, because in many cases, nature does not present categories. In many cases, nature presents a continuum. And there may be tendencies for things to act one way or another, but there may not be actually sharp breakpoints between things. And so this can be problematic, but it's still a thing we do in science, is try and classify things. There are sub-disciplines of that, such as nomenclature and I can never pronounce this right, onomatology, where you can actually study the practice of this. Now, the idea of classification itself can break out into various ideas. There is the Platonic classical approach, where you take things that have similar properties and you're basically going to say, oh, well, this thing's blue, this thing's red, this thing's big, this thing's small, they go in separate boxes. You can actually even then say, in a very kind of meta approach, what are groupings of descriptions that basically put things together, and that's called conceptual clustering. The last one is the thing we use a lot in astronomy, which is prototype theory. We find a thing, and we declare that everything else that we find like it must be therefore like it. A good example of this are these T-Tauri stars here in a nearby star-forming region. T-Tauri star is an object that's a lot like our sun 4 billion years ago, when it was very, very young, maybe even 4.5 billion years ago. It's they say, young stellar analog. They're very interesting because they tell us a lot about how our solar system probably was born and how the planets were formed and so forth. So they are an area of hot study in astronomy. But what's interesting about the T-Tauri stars, and what is very emblematic with regards to this discussion, is that in many cases we pick these prototypes. In this case, the star T-Tauri is thought to be the prototype of all T-Tauri stars. And the rule of thumb in astronomy is prototypical stars often become less prototypical as you study them more. So as you study, in this case, especially T-Tauri, it's becoming less and less like what we kind of have a picture in our head in the community of what a T-Tauri class star should be like. It's starting to come up with things that break the mold that we thought we were building by just basically picking it as the prototype. So that being said, there are many reasons to try and come up with categories and boxes to throw things in, but it's important to always keep in mind that this can be something that doesn't quite work right. So let's, from that little diversion into that level of philosophical thinking, let's circle back to the IOTA definition, which again, as I've pointed out, has a lot of words. And let's dig into that. So what does it mean? So big enough to be a ball, big enough to be a bully, and with those two facts in mind, let's do a pub quiz. I can see you guys were all at the pub last night, so let's do that. So, first question. Is the Earth a planet? Dumb question, right? No, absolutely not. I have video evidence that the Earth has not cleared its orbital zone. This was noted quite well by all the window manufacturers in Chelyabinsk as they replaced all the windows out there. So the Earth is not a planet. We've tossed one out. Very good. Let's move along. Is the planet Jupiter a planet? No, of course not. Because, again, not only does it have things hit it, we saw some news, I think it was last week, that it had been hit by a fairly small object, but a couple of amateurs with video recorders caught it. It has actually things that are permanently along its orbital path, the so-called Trojan asteroids. These objects at the, the L4 and L5 point. Maybe I mixed those up. They sit in the very interesting gravity well between the Jupiter-Sun system. And in fact, there's also, as we've seen, evidence of things hitting Jupiter, Shoemaker-Levy 9. And so Jupiter is working on it. It's going to get to it real soon. It's kind of Weight Watchers. But yeah, it hasn't quite cleared its orbital zone yet. Mars. Mars a planet? No, I'm afraid not. In fact, the moons themselves of Mars are a good example of why it's not a planet. The orbits of Phobos and Deimos are such that one of them, I forget which, one of them will crash into Mars eventually and satisfy some of the clearing requirement that it has to have. But it also has Trojans. There, in fact, are a number of bodies known to exist in the Mars-Sun gravity wells along Mars's orbit. And so it has objects that are, cluttering up its orbit and disqualifying it. Who has Trojans? There's a lot of Trojans out there, apparently. Sorry to work so blue early on a Sunday morning. But Venus, Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, Uranus, they have Trojans. There's only two things left. There is Mercury. It's too close to the sun to have Trojans. And Saturn is a very interesting case. Saturn does not have any Trojans because Jupiter's gravity seems to disturb its orbit enough, those wells in its orbit, to basically clean out those pockets of gravitational potential. So I present to you your IATA-approved solar system, though I would highlight these things around Saturn are kind of dubious. That seems to me that things are kind of still being cleared out for Saturn. Who knows? Mercury's an interesting case. We'll come back to Mercury. So there are problems with the vote. I'm not here to tell you that Pluto's a planet. I'm just here to tell you that the official definition is scientifically defenseless. And we should maybe think about a better one, and I don't know what the outcome of that might be, but right now there are some serious problems with this, the first of which was representation. So worldwide, there are about 10,000 astronomers, and only about 2,000 were in attendance at the IU. And of those, this vote that took place on the last day, most of them have left. There was about 400 of us in the room. Everybody else was off, doing a vacation on the Danube or something like that. So those of us in the room were the remnants, the dregs of astronomy, and not very good representation if you think about the astronomical community of 10,000 people being represented by a tiny sliver of that. And in fact, as I've pointed out, we were the wrong people. I, for one, am totally unqualified to talk about planetary science because I'm not a planetary scientist. I am an astronomer. I study stars. And so there was a distinct lack of planetary scientists among those people in the room voting. That was already a small number. As an example, what if the planetary scientists held their own meeting? Let's say the DPS meeting happens with all planetary scientists quite frequently, and they decided to vote on definition of the word star, which, by the way, there's no official definition for the word star. The IAU has never took it upon itself to define star, so I think that's a problem. You know, what if they basically said, oh, well, this thing is in and this thing is out? So that's kind of a flaw. The other thing, having been sitting in that room at that time, I can tell you that it was a kangaroo court. There was a distinct lack of parliamentary procedure. Let me put it this way. I am a chapter advisor for a college fraternity, Sigma Chi, very good stuff. Any Sigma Chi's in here? I see regularly 18 to 21-year-old dudes do a better job with Robert's Rules of Order than these clowns. And so that was disconcerting. I mean, we would be, during the discussion in Prague, we would be in the middle of a motion to amend, and people would start introducing new motions, or in between a vote, we tallied the yes votes, and we hadn't even got to counting the no votes, and new motions would be introduced, and it was a mess. They had a distinct need for a parliamentarian. There is a distinct lack of scientific merit on this. As this definition is strictly constructed, it defines planets as orbiting the sun, and only the sun. So there are 8 planets in the universe. Pretty special here, isn't it? As we've seen from Kepler, this mission I already mentioned, there are a lot of planets around other stars. And this is something that is just a grave oversight in this definition that came out of that meeting. What actually was completely lacking in this definition was any attention to the high end. So small planets, they're cool, but the big planets are things that are actually being found as well. And so where do you transition from a big star to a small star to an even smaller star to something that, I don't know if it's a star, if it's a planet? Where do you cross over? So in fact, in the spirit of the IU, I will actually here propose a new definition for Jupiter, which is, it is a dwarf brown dwarf. I will trademark this name. Anybody who uses it owes me a nickel. And yes, and so it's not a planet, it's a dwarf brown dwarf. It's also very poorly quantified in terms of, you know, cleared the neighborhood around its orbit is a very squishy thing to define, let's say, in mathematical terms. There actually have been some interesting journal articles and papers that have talked about this, but this is kind of hard to actually say, you know, is the orbit clear or not? It assumes omniscience. It assumes not only do you know things about the thing you're looking at, it assumes you know everything there is to know it's in its total environment. And scientific etymology typically doesn't work that way. It's also inconsistent. The word dwarf planet, it's very explicit that a dwarf planet is a separate thing from a planet. Yet elsewhere in astronomy, we have dwarf stars, and they're just a kind of star. And we have dwarf galaxies, and they're just a kind of galaxy. So that kind of etymology maybe reflects some of the lack of proficiency with the English language that came out of that admittedly international community. And there's also some, I think, fairly unnecessary segregation. We already have a fairly big umbrella that is being used to describe the word planet. You know, covers things like a gas giant like Jupiter, and it covers a rocky little runt like Mercury. So, you know, a fairly ecumenical approach here, I think, is warranted. Finally, yeah, as I mentioned, it really talks a lot about what a thing does rather than what a thing is. As Alan Stern, I think, likes to mention, it fails the Star Trek test. You can't just look out the window and say, you know, what does it look like? What is it? You know, you basically have, you know, Mr. Spock saying, well, we have to survey the rest of the entire solar system here before we can tell if it's a planet or not, sir. And there are those situations where you really want to know quickly if it's a planet or not. If you're going to hop out of your spacecraft and try to escape onto a planet, you don't want to have to survey the whole solar system to know if it's a planet or not. So anyway, I will highlight interesting implications of this definition. Recently in the news, there's been this Planet 9 predicted, not discovered, by, again, Mike Brown and his colleague, Konstantin Batygin. And this is something that is a real tour de force, actually. Some very interesting and compelling mathematical modeling done by these two that has looked at the orbits of these Kuiper belt objects to predict the existence of a potentially 10 Earth mass object that is in the outer solar system. So very good work, compelled actually by those existing data, and is really motivating an interesting search in astronomy now to see if this thing can be detected. It's a lot of fun, actually. But is it a planet? It's an interesting question. Of course it's a planet, right? It's 10 Earth masses. Well, not so fast. So it's Sunday, so I can quote the Bible. In Matthew 26, I think it is, it's mentioned by Jesus that if you live by the sword, maybe you'll die by the sword. And so while Mike Brown didn't make the Pluto vote happen or anything, his Twitter handle is Pluto Killer. He definitely was an accessory to murder, I would say. So let's take that definition from the IAU and see how it fares against Planet 9. Well, it actually is very interesting to me that this is, in fact, the very first question that Mike addressed on a blog post. His first blog post about Planet 9 is it really a planet? And here is a plot from that blog post where he shows distance from the sun versus the mass of the planet. And these two parameters define the degree to which you can clear your orbital zone. Now, there's a small other little ingredient here, which is time. So this dashed line is a 10 billion-year-old solar system, and they show very helpfully that if you extend that line off in this direction, this parameter space where they expect to discover Planet 9 does not get clipped by this line. That it is in this space above this line where planets exist, and the space below this line where dwarf planets exist, that they expect to pull this off and expect to find an object in the outer solar system. As an aside, I'll point out some of the craziness of this, which is, let's take Mars and move it to the orbit of Eris. No longer a planet. So Mars, we all agree, is a planet, except if you move it far enough away from the sun, no longer a planet. So one of the highlights of this currently accepted IAU definition. The other thing I'll highlight is they conveniently extrapolated a 10 billion-year-old solar system. But how old is the solar system? It's 4.6, which is actually this other line here. Let's extend it for them. Uh-oh, this is a problem. It happens to go right through that discovery space. Let's zoom in on that. Wow. So there's a substantial chance that this body, when it's discovered, depending on how big it is and how far away it is, it looks like about a 30% chance of being a dwarf planet at 10 solar masses, sorry, 10 Earth masses. So this is interesting, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander, I would say. So potentially only a dwarf planet will be found as a result of this very interesting work. Occasionally I feel like this when Planet 9 is being talked about. I am from Lowell. So, Pluto just doesn't get enough love. So, I feel like we can call attention to that. So here's what Planet 9 might look like, but this caption on this does need to potentially be annotated to correctly describe what this thing is. It could be Dwarf Planet 9, that's 10 times the size of our planet. So again, this is just being consistent with the approved IAU definition. So what's better? The approved definition, not very good. What's better? I would actually submit to you that the IAU almost got it right. The original proposal that we received when we showed up in Prague of the resolution 5, not 5A, where all it was being called out is it big enough to be a ball, is good enough. And it's a very inclusionary thing. you get a lot of things that fall under that umbrella. At the moment, there would be, I think, 13 accepted planets. If you really, really have to marry yourself to dynamically significant planets that are pushing things around with their gravity, then you basically have 8 major or classical planets. And then you have a number of minor planets, things like Pluto and Ceres and Sedna and so forth. It accommodates actually all kinds of other things as well if you have that category. Rogue planets, things that are actually ejected from their solar system, which is increasingly thought to be likely from how we've been discovering the architectures of extrasolar planetary systems. It covers things like Tatooine planets, planets that orbit 2 stars simultaneously, and all these other categories. The original proposal actually would potentially serve from being modified to not have binary planets. I actually don't care about that. I think it's kind of cool to think about. And you would have categories. You would have the major planets. You can have, even within the major planets, you'd have the rocky or terrestrial objects, such as the Earth and Venus and so forth. You'd have giants, and the giants themselves break up into the gas giants and the ice giants. And this is all language that is being used by the planetary scientists. It's the sort of thing that's a little alien to us astronomers, but the people that work in planetary science talk about these things already this way. And then you could have many, many dwarf planets, both dirt dwarfs, such as Ceres, and then also ice dwarfs. And there's a lot of them. There's going to be a whole bunch of those dwarfs. And things that have been discovered would all probably fall under that umbrella as more is learned about them, and it's established, are they spherical, or more technically, are they in hydrostatic equilibrium? This oddball here, Haumea, is actually shaped a little funny because it spins real fast, and so it stretches out, but it's still in hydrostatic equilibrium. An argument that's often countered against this suggestion is that you get too many planets. There's too many planets. Think of the children. So what I'll point out to you is I have kids at home under age 10 and younger who have learned 50 states and 50 states capitals, and if they can do that, they can learn 20 planets. So, there's not too many of them. As far as what people in this room can do, if you happen to like the idea of at least pointing out that the current definition is not very consistent, be vocal about that. Planet is very much a cultural term. It's very much not what people like me on our ivory tower think. It's very much what people in general think a planet should be. One of the things I'll basically throw out there as a parting shot, literally a parting shot from New Horizons, is we have learned a lot about Pluto. We are still learning a lot about Pluto. To have made any kind of decision on this before we had the prospect of inspecting this world was really kind of premature, I would say. And what I see when I look at the people who specialize in this kind of thing, what I see when they are working on this, they are using certain kinds of language. And they are using certain kind of language that is planetary in nature when they talk about what they have seen. They're talking about mountain ranges. They're talking about tectonics. They're talking about glaciers. And they're talking about winds and other atmospheric features like haze. These are things we think about when we think about talking about planets, not when we think about, potato-shaped asteroids. This is a world unto its own, and we have been totally transformed in our view about Pluto with this visit of New Horizons. I will go on to point out that language does have consequences. When you toss out things like Sedna and Orcus and so forth as official planets, it's really hard to get your stump-stupid congressman to fund a mission there. I don't see anybody talking about New Horizons 2 to go to Makemake or to go to Haumea. And if they were being referred to as planets, maybe you'd get some more talk like that. But language does have consequences. And so it is good to think about, maybe we can come back to this notion and come back to this idea and improve on it. So some of us are carrying the torch and trying to talk about at least thinking about this in better ways. So occasional articles that come from people reporters who talk to me. And I would maybe put it to a vote here. What's your preference? So let's ask the question here. Do you like the new definition, big enough to be a ball, big enough to be a bully, also only applies in our solar system, versus the second one, which is just big enough to be a ball? Who's in favor of the first? And who likes the second? All right, we got a good show of hands here. I like this. So, but I'm biased. So anyway, that makes planets happy. And, epilogue. Let's close off this talk here. What became of Xena? Well, there was an official name accepted for this. This is now Eris, though very cleverly they threw in a name for the satellite, which is Dysnomia, right here. Dysnomia is the god of lawlessness, so we still have at least a little bit of a reference to our favorite actress. And then also we started off this story talking about Mike's jacket. So what happened to the jacket? So after a year between the air races, we came back to the air races, and we gave it back to Mike. We had a big ceremony, involved a gong and a bunch of candles. And we gave, every visit had, the people had been collecting a pin of where it was, so we gave the collection of pins to him. In fact, we had so many pins, we bought a new jacket for Mike to go along with that. And so we gave it back to him mostly. We actually did take one liberty, which is, it was one of these undercover jackets with the rip-out panels that said police. We actually unzipped the little one and replaced it with a new one. But the original one we took and we pulled some money together and we sent it one last interesting place. And so there's a piece now of Mike's jacket which is in orbit. So we actually put it on board the Genesis 2 spacecraft, which is still up there. I just took this picture right here the other day. And you can occasionally see pictures of it from the webcams on board. There's Mike's jacket. So Mike's jacket even made it into outer space. So I'm very proud of that fact. And anybody know any German here, you can see how it's settling back in. Thank you.
The telescope has revolutionized the human experience countless times since its creation some 400 years ago. Celestron is doing our part to continue the evolution of the telescope and expand the horizons of the human mind. For decades, Celestron has been committed to providing individuals with high-quality telescopes and optical instruments at affordable prices. We strive to clear the way for intellectually curious people around the globe to experience and explore deeper into nature and the cosmos.
When I think of Celestron, I automatically think of the people. To me, a company is people. We have people that are passionate about what they do, and we have extremely talented individuals that work for this company. And I think it takes those intangibles to create great product.
Founded in 1960 in Los Angeles, California, Celestron has been an industry leader in telescopes for over 50 years. As the world's largest telescope brand, we continue to develop technological innovations that set the pace of the industry. Celestron is synonymous with inspired design and state-of-the-art technologies. As an industry leader, we strive to remain the world's most innovative telescope brand. As a rapidly growing outdoors company, Celestron focuses on products that enhance the exploration of the great outdoors. As a champion of STEM education and the arts, we pursue the advancement of public scientific understanding. Our long-standing track record supporting astronomy, education, and outdoor-related nonprofits across the globe speaks to the values we hold dear. Celestron is committed to encouraging the exploration of our natural world in fun and unique ways.
There's like a lifetime of good memories at Celestron. It's probably one of our star parties. I'd say probably at the Badlands, when we had in the middle of nowhere a crowd of hundreds of kids coming off of school buses coming up and observing the sun for the very first time through a telescope.
I've had so many amazing experiences here at Celestron, from helping assist with the setup of equipment with Stephen Hawking to the very humbling experience of a standing ovation after we announced to teachers at the National Science Teacher Convention that we were donating the binoculars to them.
One that definitely stands out as kind of an achievement in my career was when we launched the CEVO telescopes, the Celestron Evolution. That was a really proud moment for me to be able to look at the people that I've essentially had grown up with and spent my career and be sort of at the pinnacle of achievement and being able to sort of unveil that and communicate that to all these people that I highly respect and have worked with a long time.
One of the things that makes a company great is great employees. We just strive to push the envelope to really accommodate the needs of our customers. Those are the keys to what drives Celestron and what makes us successful.
Our goal is to inspire a sense of wonder, curiosity, and fun in our communities and throughout our company. We desire to be a vehicle that helps drive humanity's insatiable desire to know the universe.
My vision for Celestron would be taking all those qualities that the company's built upon and taking them into the future, into the next generation. And so we need to be continually evolving as a company.
As someone that's been in this industry a long time, I do think that Celestron's best days are now, and the even better days lie right ahead of us.
We dedicate our work to opening the eyes of the people around the world and enhancing their view of the cosmos, into the past and on to the future.